And I want to tell everyone who's with us today how grateful we are to have you with us. And I hope you've been as impressed as I have by everything that's gone on. Anthony, you did an outstanding job, and so did our panel. Thanks. I am thrilled to have the great privilege to introduce Sister Simone Campbell. Sister is joining us today, and Sister has spent a life in helping to build rural communities. She's going to talk about the role of faith in rural communities as well. Sister Simone Campbell, as you know, has been part of Network, was critically important in putting the Affordable Care Act to a conclusion. Her influence, her relationship with President Obama, her relationship with legislators was absolutely essential. Her moral voice in making sure that we did the right thing at the time of the Affordable Care Act. Sister has continued to fight every day for social justice, for doing what is right in our country. Sister was the center of Nuns on the Bus. And I remember when I was in Congress, Nuns on the Bus was going to show up in my home state of Indiana. And they said, Nuns on the Bus are coming to your office. And for most of the folks who Nuns on the Bus was visiting in Indiana, it was going to be to ask, why don't you support the Affordable Care Act? And so I was, in fact, a little bit nervous when I heard that Nuns on the Bus was coming, because I supported the Affordable Care Act, but I was hopeful that they weren't going to demonstrate against some other issue outside my office. And Sister and everyone on the bus laughed. We had them come in for hot chocolate. We had them visit with everybody. The area of the office was flooded with well-wishers from around the region. Sister Simone has been a voice of moral conscience to our country. She has been someone who has epitomized what we read in the Bible, that whatever you do for the least of us, you do for me. And Sister's focus has also been laser sharp on rural America, on areas of rural America that have struggled, on making sure that everyone shares in the bounty of our beloved country. And so I would like to introduce to you someone who is a personal hero to me, who has helped lead America to a better place, Sister Simone Campbell.
Oh, thank you so much, Senator Donnelly. I remember vividly that visit, and I know you were nervous. But
can you imagine putting together coffee and donuts for an entire busload in the hopes that they would be easy on you?
It'd be nice. But actually, my goal was to be a sign that you were middle of the road and to support your candidacy at that point for Senate.
Well, we loved having you.
It worked that time. Anyway, thank you so much for that gracious introduction. And what a perfect place to put the issue of faith after that last panel, because hearing both Governor Kitzhaber, Dr. Powers, and I didn't jot down the other names, it was so keenly felt the pain of our communities now with disinformation and the COVID crisis that we're facing. Where do we turn in these days of disinformation and alienation? Well, okay, I'm a Catholic sister, so you probably expect me to say this, but I think faith is one place which can be supportive, especially in rural communities where the fabric of our society can be so carefully so it can be so frayed and so challenged. So I'm excited to have a chance to talk with you about our work and what we found in rural communities. So I'm going to talk for a while, and then we're going to have a chance for question and answers at the end. It's always my favorite part because I hear me talk all the time. So I always want to hear interaction. So I look forward to that part. Okay, so one other piece that you need to know is that for the last 2 weeks, I've been working. I volunteered at one of the Afghan camps with the folks from Afghanistan. We had over 4,000 folks on the base where I was working. But I was doing childcare. But I caught a little kid's cold. And so if I have a small coughing attack, I think I've got all my accoutrements here, but don't worry, it'll be fine. Okay? I'm on the mend. Anyway, and it was an amazing experience to work there. So when we think of faith, or at least when I think of faith, I think of it as a way of coming together around the values that we hold most deeply. I describe it as the shared spirit of life, that what I in our tradition call that creative God bringing forth every day a new creation, and our responsibility in the human domain to collaborate, cooperate, and enhance that creation. And I think these values, the love of one another, sustaining for the long haul, being together in a journey, often called pilgrimage, are symbols that hold together rural communities. In 2019, in the very beginning of 2020, pre-COVID, we were so lucky. With the help of one country, we held meetings around the country. We held, let me see if I can remember, 17 meetings in 16 states in rural communities, just to get a flavor of what the rural community was experiencing. Okay, I have to confess, confession is part of my tradition. So I have to confess, I'm a city girl. What did I know? But I got the most beautiful education in these gatherings, which were mostly in houses of worship, in churches, or other religious facilities. And in that, I got education that I want to share with you. It may not be news, but I think there are things we can learn from the collected experience. So in these meetings, what I would usually start off with, I'm a city girl, so what do city girls get wrong about living in the country? And almost inevitably, somebody would say, after we laughed about it and got started, somebody would say, city folk think country people are dumb and uneducated. And it's not true. And then I came back to the city saying my heart was broken by that expression. But then some of my city folks said, well, it's true. Why would they stay? But then what I found was in the faith community, where there are bonds between one church and another denominationally, that myth or that judgment gets broken open in faith because we're peers in our faith tradition. I know in the Catholic churches that we went to, it was, I don't know, we know the secret handshake. Well, there's not really a secret handshake, but we know we share faith, so we share a life together regardless of where we live. We share a commitment to those who are marginalized. We share a commitment to the gospel of Jesus. We share a commitment to living in an ethical way. And that commitment helps bridge some of the judgments that become divisive. So in this reality that does exist, these judgments that do exist, I think I brought some fresh eyes for rural folks and certainly for my city folk colleagues. Now, some of the things that I learned in the process is that a house of worship, a place of worship in rural communities, is you don't have the luxury of being a single function. And that's true in the cities too, but I think more so in rural communities, is that there is more of a family spirit so that you know families in that extended sense and have a sense of commitment to each other. Let me give you an example. Um, well, you probably all know this, but one of the examples was that in Poetry, Texas. Don't you love that there's a Poetry, Texas? It's an hour and a half east of Dallas. I just love that. They have their big water tower and it says poetry, but the county didn't let them incorporate, and there's big shenanigans around that. But we were in Poetry, Texas, in a Methodist church founded in 1845. And before we get started, as the group is gathering, this woman comes in carrying her casserole. She couldn't leave it in the car. She had to put it in the fridge. She was taking it to a woman who'd recently been released from the hospital and was a member of the church, and so she wanted to make sure the casserole was okay. So she puts it in the fridge. And a guy comes in, kind of has cowboy boots, comes in, swaggers in, and says, "Can't start yet. Got to call," I forget who he said, "got to call so-and-so. He's got a cow down in this field. You know, you can't leave a cow down." I didn't know that. So, okay, you have to do that. And then we get started, and then a guy comes in and says, "Wait, sorry I'm late. I had to help so-and-so get his mower out of the ditch." What I learned was the real practical daily awareness of shared need and shared support. This doesn't happen in urban settings that much. We try to make it happen. We try to replicate it, but it is not that organic, visceral experience. And then at the same Poetry, Texas, this one woman came in. I think of her as an old lady, but she might have been younger than me. But I think of her as old. She was kind of wrinkled up, and she comes in and she said, "I looked you up on the internet. I don't agree with you on anything." And I said to her, "Oh, that's great. Come on in. Come on in. We're going to have a great conversation. Oh, I'm looking forward to this." And you know what happened for her and for this whole group? Is we got talking, we got sharing, we went deeper in the conversation. And then they were talking about how they were not so upset that their hospital had closed because their local doctor had said that he wouldn't send the dog of his worst enemy there. So I gathered the care wasn't so good. But they were upset that the grocery store had closed because people in the suburbs of Dallas were moving further and further out to commute into jobs. And when they commuted into jobs, they would stay in town, go to the big box stores, and come back and not support the local economy. This caused their local grocery store to close. So I thought, city girl that I am, I thought I would help. I do policy. I'm a policy analyst. So I say, well, you know, it's recently come out that the Supplemental Nutrition Benefits Program, SNAP, food stamps, is a great addition to rural economies. It has more power in rural economies because it has a bigger multiplier effect, a 1.6 multiplier effect. For every dollar spent of food stamps in the rural economy, it's an additional 60 cents that works through the economy. That's a great return on investment. I was sure wrong. Kaboom! They went nuts and started talking about those people and them and they and how they ought to support themselves and take care of themselves. And it's the idea of personal responsibility. But the gift of this conversation and the gift of faith is that you can, in that setting, say, "Hey, stop, wait." And I pointed out to them that they had just spent a fair amount of time expressing to me how they care for everybody. How one brings a casserole, one calls it a cow's stand, another helps get a mower out of a ditch. And what I heard them saying was individualism. That you had to take care of yourself. You couldn't rely on anybody else. You had to be. And they were like shocked. Nobody had called them on it before, apparently. So then we had this most profound conversation. What was it that we were valuing in community? And together we came up with this idea that what they were speaking about was communal duty, the duty of the community to respond to the needs around them. And one of the things that frustrated them about federal programs was there were two things. One was federal law said it was illegal to share your SNAP benefits with anybody else. They felt that broke their community. But the other piece underlying it, they felt kind of embarrassed that the need was so big that they couldn't respond to it all, that it was too big for a small community to manage. And that embarrassment and that sense of judgment then caused them to be defensive. But because we were in a faith setting, we could then take a deep breath, come together, and see, well, how can we support our community? What ways do you support your community? And in that, discover that we did share bonds of faith, connection, way beyond a single program. And that my guilt about not being able to meet every need really got reflected in the gospel saying, do what you can. Blessed are the poor. We can make this happen. Isn't that interesting? And you know what happened with this woman who told me that she didn't agree with me on anything? By the end of the conversation and connecting with communal duty, she's telling me about 2 of her 6 children who had overdosed, one in the opioid crisis, one in a drug overdose, and that she, in her old age, had chosen to have she showed me the tattoos she had for her 2 children, to carry them with her. That for me was the sacredness of faith that can break through the traditional arguments to find a way of meeting and healing. And isn't that what faith is that meeting across difference with a shared concern, a shared empathy, a shared bonding that could make a difference for the future. I love poetry, Texas. And then we were outside Columbia, Missouri. I'll never forget this. And they were telling us, it came up because there'd been division in the community, and those of you rural folks will understand it a lot better than me, but container hog farms were a big flashpoint. And the fact that the Chinese own this huge container hog farm, and the pollution from it is terrible, and it's ruining the water, and blah, 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 blah. I heard all that rural stuff. But, so there was all this fight. And then I naively say something, well, can you protest or, let that be known? And one of the women, I'll never forget, she said, in a city, when you go to a demonstration, you're anonymous. There's no consequence. But when you go to a demonstration in the rural community, you're known, and it will not be forgotten. We're not conservative, she said. We're just careful of our relationships. It was a whole new insight for me. So how can we be careful of our relationships, but candid with each other when there's difference? And again, I think this is the gift of the faith community, where we as people of faith can come together in that safe setting, knowing that we hold values that are the foundation of all the rest of our work. And we can have differences on policy, but it doesn't disrupt my connection with you. But the fact that we're not anonymous is critically important. This woman afterwards said, I was so angry over the hog farms. I just said, I'm never going to have that guy she was opposing take my steers to market again. I'm just not going to do it. And then she said, well, tomorrow I'm having him take my steers to market because he's the best guy to do it. There's reality, too, that supersedes our more theoretical or principled positions. And faith can be the anchor that can see us through that. Because I can have a connection with you when we gather for worship that transcends the political, the struggle, the fights. So faith becomes that anchor point of helping us bond beyond the fight. Good news, eh? Now, faith also can provide a way these days to help heal some of the edges. And this is where being in the 21st century is really a great gift. When I was a young sister, back in Governor Kitzhaber's state of Oregon, I did religious education. And I was a young puppy and got to travel Western Oregon. And it was just the very beginning of interfaith work. But what I came to realize fairly quickly in Western Oregon, that the collaboration among clergy in small rural communities is a real anchor point that can help sustain the ministry if you're not alone. And the gift of both the ecumenical and interreligious movement is a real treasure now for supporting people in ministry. Because faith is challenged in rural communities. And we heard that often, that it's not just a place for Sunday worship, but it also responds to the needs or Saturday worship or Friday worship, depending upon your tradition. But it's also a place for the food pantry, for clothing, for volunteers in the school. I'll never forget the pastor who has a church outside of Amsterdam, New York, in upstate New York. And she was saying that her denomination, I forget exactly what she was, possibly Lutheran, I'm not sure. Anyway, she had been asked to take on 2 other churches because they didn't have personnel to send to them, and the congregations were getting smaller and unable to support their local clergy. This was stretching her to a way that it was very hard to sustain. And actually, listening to the healthcare conversation panel, I began to think, ooh, that's sort of like getting stretched in a hospital setting, only it just keeps going on and on as you try to respond to more and more people. So as we see faith expectations on pastors and church staff to serve more needs, we have a shrinking population. Now, in my beloved tradition, there may be some people on this listening in that would say we could fix that if we wanted to. The issue of women's ordination is a big thing, but it's not the reality now in my tradition. And so what we need to do is figure out, how do we care for what I consider hungry people? How do we nourish the community that we have so that we can flourish and be sustained for the long haul? So this pastor outside of Amsterdam getting stretched to more than one church, I know in the Catholic tradition, priests are having to cover. As one priest has a Saturday night mass in one place, has a Sunday 9 o'clock, a Sunday noon, and a Sunday evening mass in 4 different locations, just to try to cover the territory. Well, you don't get the same relationships and connections and community if you do it in that fashion. You need other leaders locally. So I'm worried that while faith has been an anchor point that's glorious in rural communities, that the prognosis is a little worrisome. How do we maintain that sense of community that has a more generous heart, that responds to the best practices of faith, and not overwhelm or have too high of expectations? So part of it is that directly at the church, what's going on, how it works, getting services, making sick calls, doing all of those, taking the casserole that the woman had in Poetry, Texas to the person who needed it. It's a relational existence, and faith embodies that. It's one of the best things about faith in my book. So when you get to actually do like Jesus did and go visit somebody and be connected, it's not my big policy thoughts, but it's the human thoughts. But there's also the other aspect that touches on the last panel, and that is so much of healthcare has faith connections around the country, especially in rural communities, because there is a commitment to making sure that healthcare is taken care of. I'll never forget being up in Wabasha, Minnesota, and we had the CEO of their 25-bed hospital, and they had a 45, I think it was 45-bed nursing home, and they were Catholic with St. Elizabeth's and St. Mary's nursing home, and their effort to sustain the service in the community so people who were sick or recovering could be still in their community. They were working very hard to do home health nursing also, but the big problem was, well, I'm probably talking to the choir on this, but the big problem was the lack of access to broadband. So if visiting nurses were out at a farmhouse, they couldn't access the patient's records because they didn't have access. Details. City folk don't understand that. But what these folks were doing were finding inventive ways to work around that, to make sure they had what they needed and that their people could stay in the community and be visited by family and connected to friends and be supported. We all know we flourish if we're connected to friends and not in an alien territory. But the CEO told me the thing he was most worried about was that he employed 450 people, and 60% of them were 55 or older. He was worried about the future workforce, that was going to be the thing that undercut his capacity to maintain the service, the faith-based service in this community of Wabasha. And then in the conversation at the roundtable, they got talking about 4 busloads of people left this area every day to travel an hour and a half to Rochester, Minnesota to take people down to work at the Mayo Clinic and to bring people back at night. 3 hours a day spent in commuting so that they could have affordable housing. But what was happening was that very fact that people were commuting so far, like in Poetry, Texas, it was undercutting their capacity to create community, because by the time people got home, they weren't interested in the town council. They weren't interested in the school board. They were exhausted. They had to take care of the kids, fix dinner, go to bed, and get up and do it all over again. So I think we have some real design problems. Some of what we've learned in COVID is that it is possible to do more things remotely. Maybe that'll help. Obviously, with healthcare, got to kind of be on the ground, hands-on. Couldn't you be hands-on at the local hospital or nursing home? Couldn't that work as well? So while community is possible and faith becomes an anchor for it, the big worry is that it's being eroded by these long commutes and this search for cheaper housing. It's a problem. I hope we put our heads together and figure some ways out of this. It's really critically important that we solve these problems for our future generations. There was another hospital in Tiffin, Ohio, where we were, where they had made the decision. It was slightly larger. I think it was like maybe 125 beds. But they had made the decision that they send all of the specialty care to Cleveland. That's the closest metropolis. But that folks came back to the local hospital for recovery and longer term treatment. And that they found that people flourished better, recovered faster, because they had their family around them. They had the local folks around them. And so they had worked that deal out with the Cleveland Hospital and the insurers, who are, let's face it, the insurance companies make a lot of these decisions. So We need to educate them too about the benefits, the long-term benefits of that human connection. And that's where faith is also important going forward. So the other way, and I'm just going to add this as a plug because of my recent experience with our Afghan guests, is that the rural community can really respond to our Afghan guests because many of the families come from rural Afghanistan. I didn't realize this until I did these 2 weeks, 2 intense, exhausting weeks. But the realizing that Afghanistan is the size of Texas. Did you know that? I didn't know that. And the thing that I came to realize is that many of the families are from more rural communities. They know animal husbandry. They know agriculture. I think there's a real opportunity for rejuvenation of some of our rural communities in supporting the relocation of Afghans families to our communities. I think this is something that the faith community could lead, but I think it's also something that we could all move into as a way to build up and respond to people who literally gave their lives for our nation and for our foreign policy, and who are so very vulnerable. And I have to tell you, having done childcare all these 2 weeks, the kids will capture your heart in a heartbeat. They are just adorable. But welcoming our Afghan guests could be a way for rejuvenation and a shared commitment to making that work. That could be helpful. So that's been all the good news about faith. Before I finish and we open up to questions, and I did see a note that somebody's here from Tiffin. We had a great time. We were at the Franciscan Sisters, just so you know. Anyway, so there are tensions within the faith community too. You're probably not surprised to hear that. But it's not so much between denominations or religious traditions in towns or rural communities themselves. They're within the denominations. I recently did a day-long retreat workshop for the UCC Church of southeastern Pennsylvania. It includes half of Pennsylvania. And so you get the very rural churches and the Philadelphia area. And there are real feelings between the two. But to get people talking to each other about ministry, there became kind of some common conversation. But the fact is the urban-rural tension shows up in our faiths too. And so what we have to do, those of us in rural churches, we become missionaries to educate folks. You got to find out, are they willing to be educated? But the other piece is making sure that you share the reality of what you know. It is a gift and it is a great opportunity. Finally, in that regard, Serene Jones, Reverend Dr. Serene Jones, who's the president of Union Theological Seminary in New York City, said that one of her biggest challenges as the head of a renowned seminary is that most of her students are from urban settings, but their first calls to ministry are going to be in rural settings, and they are not prepared for them. And so how do we find ways of educating, translating, helping bridge this painful divide that exists in our nation? And that's bridging that divide with compassion and clarity that I think is the call of faith. The gift of faith is learning to listen. Within my tradition, the scriptures with Jesus did a lot of listening. Usually we think about what he said, but there was also listening. What do you need? What do you seek? What do you want? And those sacred conversations, I think, can be led in a faith context where there's not the, hopefully, not the judgment, the dismissiveness, the anger that often gets triggered in secular settings, but rather is a call to us to be our best selves and invite people to the center where we can respond to the needs of our people. Rural America needs it. Urban America needs it. All of us need it. We do have this opportunity. People of faith in the rural setting are an anchor point, have always been an anchor point for the community, for service, for the needs of the times. I'm grateful that I got a window into that. I am grateful that as a city person, I got educated a little bit. And I am really, really grateful to share this time with you. Thank you so much.
Well, Sister, thank you so much. That was really, really inspiring.
Oh,
and,
good.
and I want to also tell you that, when you came to my part of Indiana, as you well know, that's where we build a lot of RVs and a lot of manufacturing and engines and such. And I want to tell you how much everybody admired the people on the bus. But I also want to tell you that the crowd itself really admired the bus. and maybe not in every part of the country, but in that part of the country, we were all like, what kind of engine you think it's got in there? What do you think put it together? Oh, I know that company. So we were not only proud to have you, we were proud to have the vehicle as well.
I love it. That's great.
But it was really inspiring. One of the things on here, James said that he was taught in Bucyrus by many of the Tiffin Franciscans that you may have met. I personally was taught by Dominican sisters who believed in education, but also believed in making sure that the class behaved itself as well. So
that's right. Discipline. Learning discipline is an important piece. Got you to where you are. We're pretty proud of you. That's great.
Right. Well, one of the great questions we have is, how do we encourage our local churches and rural communities to engage in social justice work without alienating more conservative members that may be part of the congregation as well?
I think that's a critical question. It's a question not just for rural America; it's a question for all of America. And the thing that I like to say is that that before you can open people's minds, you have to break their hearts. And storytelling. That's why I tell a lot of stories. Is storytelling can make a difference. Like I think with my beloved experience with the Afghan families is hearing the sacrifices they made for our nation and for our military personnel and our USAID, all these folks. And now they are the most vulnerable. If we break our hearts with these people who have been of service to our nation, can't we at least welcome one family in, two families in? So it's not about social justice. It's not waving my flag and showing up for a demonstration because you are careful of relationships. You've got to be protective of relationships. But can't we respond to the needs of real people? And I think it's that letting your heart be broken open. And what I've discovered is if I'm busy guarding my heart, nobody's going to get inside of me. I'm not going to care about you. It's just this. If I'm doing that, then I'm closing in on myself and I'm not really a person of faith. But if I'm open, if I let my heart be broken open and everybody's got a space, even the ones who are conservative. I mean, I make judgments. And so I don't talk to people about what I think they believe. I just assume it. Maybe in the church setting, you could have a conversation. I'm really concerned about these Afghans who've given so much for our nation. Do you think maybe our community might be able to do something? I know they're on Marine bases and the Marines are being really helpful. Could we be helpful here? And maybe the way to do it, okay, politics is everything, is saying, could we help the Marines do this?
That's a great way to put it. I've helped with Habitat for Humanity over the years, and one of the things you see is some folks are still suspicious of it because like, giving away houses to somebody. I said, you're not giving away anything. People are building sweat equity is what they're doing. But over the years, what I told folks is I said, well, look, just you like to work on stuff. Take a hammer. Come on over with me. You can break things. You can you can go to the basement and knock some walls out. And inevitably, once they share as part of it, they feel part of it, and then they bring more people back as well.
Right. And isn't that the thing that the at least my image of rural America is the idea of it's relationship. It's always relationship. Come
Yeah.
with me. Let's do this. But okay, confession is part of our tradition, right? Bless me, sisters and brothers, for I have sinned. The the thing that I learned on the military base with the Afghan families is the amazing capacity of Marines to build stuff
They're the best.
quickly.
They're the best.
Quickly. Yes. And their care for these Afghan families as they wander the camp and they keep us secure, they cook every meal, they are working hard to create Afghan menus. The Afghan families are saying that their food is really good, which is like gift. And they're collecting clothes and slipping other stuff in. And
Incredible.
I found myself changed by my experience of the military. So that's a gift to me. And so if I could change, couldn't anybody change? That's my thought.
I will also tell you, if you ever find your bus at a washed out bridge, 5 Marines will build a new one in about 3 hours. So just so you know, they
And
are.
I believe it. I believe it.
So,
Absolutely.
sister, we have a question that they asked that you were for Obamacare. It had many flaws as well as successes. Some of the flaws were in regards to premiums, deductibles,
Yep.
co-pays, drug prices. And this particular question is it time for a government plan like Medicare for all? And then I have a follow-up of my own for you on that as well.
Okay. Medicare for all is a slogan. It's not a plan. It's a lovely slogan.
Yeah.
But okay, so I've done politics in DC. And the thing that we know is that Obamacare was not perfect. It was never intended to be the final law. Blame Massachusetts because it was the election of Scott Brown way back in 2012 that took Kennedy's place, or 2010, who took Kennedy's place, that created the situation where we lost 60 Democrats in the Senate. And so the Senate messed up. Sorry, Senator Donnelly, but that was before you were there. So you were part of the House that allowed it to happen. And the only way we could have it happen was if the House passed the Senate bill. So some of the problems of rollout was just because they couldn't change any of the dates in the legislation. They couldn't adjust some of the timing. I mean, there was all kinds of problems in it, yes. And yes, we need to improve it. Some of the additional subsidies in the COVID recovery packages have been fabulous, and they need to continue. And they're trying to do that in the reconciliation package. So yes, there is a lot to be done. But listen, my beloved friends, the idea of Medicare for all, or it's just a title. Yes, we need to have healthcare for everybody. It has to be affordable. It has to be quality. It has to be accessible. It has to be equitable. In this nation, there is a very vast difference between one group and another's outcomes in healthcare. But you could use it as your slogan, but don't die on that battle line. Die on making sure that we've got quality, affordable, accessible, equitable healthcare for all. That's it. And then whatever we call it, I don't care. I just want it done.
Well, sister, I remember at the time of that vote, because it was the 2008 election. I won by 38 points. 2010 election, I won by 1. And it was directly related to the health care bill. But what I tried to tell folks, and in years afterward, folks would say, well, I had wished you got the public option. I don't know why you didn't do that. And
because we couldn't pass the House bill. That's why.
That's exactly right. I said, and we're seeing that now, I think, with the reconciliation plan and such, is I would tell folks, I said, look, there's a perfect world and there's a real world where you have
Right.
to actually try to do things. And if you have the public option as the bill at that time, it fails. And so you have no health care. And so health care for 20 million Americans just doesn't exist anymore. Is it
Right.
possible that now or in the future we could do public option? Sure. But in 2010, that wasn't the case. And so what you have to try to do, and I think Jesus did this and you do this, is doing the perfect is not always available. So you do the best you can. And 70% of I always told folks, I said, look, 70% of a pizza is a lot better than 100% of no pizza.
Well, and you'll remember this, Senator, when I just had to laugh when that morning after Scott Brown got elected in Washington D.C. we had been saying the faith community, the progressives, everybody had been saying the Senate bill stinks. It's terrible. It's awful. We're for the House bill. The House bill has the public option. The House bill has this, that, and the other thing. Scott Brown gets elected, and we all change positions. Business had been for the Senate bill, and they start saying, oh, I think we need more hearings. We shouldn't rush this. Let's not do anything rash, you know. We've only been working on it for 2 years. And then we, progressives, said, oh, House bill, Schmouse bill. Oh, the Senate bill, it's fine with us. We love the Senate bill. And so we all changed places to accommodate a new political reality. It wasn't
everything is situational, right?
That's politics.
I will tell you something you would have been proud of is one of the Indiana bishops. I talked to him just right before the vote. I told him, I said,
Bishop Tobin?
I won't dime them out. So I said, I'll give you a call just to let you know. And I called and I said, I'm gonna vote for this bill. And the bishop asked, is it the best bill we could get? I said, yeah. And he said, well, God bless you and good luck. Right? Amen. I mean, you can't ask for more than that. There's another question here, sister, and it's from one of our great watchers here today, saying we are moving to a theocracy in America where religions want to control America by their beliefs alone. Is this a threat to our survival as we move forward? And do you see it that way?
Actually, I don't think it's religion that wants to control. It's religious people who are insecure who want to control. And they use religion as a cover, as a judgment. And how my beloved tradition, I'm sure everybody's read about some of the kerfuffle between our U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops and President Biden. Well, Pope Francis has made it abundantly clear to the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, butt out, stop it. And so the fact is, I don't believe there's an institutional effort to take over or rule the world. I think the harder part is that it's difficult for us to have serious conversations with each other about things that matter when we differ. And I really am promoting this twofold aspect of spiritual practice. And the first is sacred listening. Sacred listening is when you stop all my chitter chatter in my head and I just listen to your perspective and I ask curious questions. And once I've asked a curious question and I've gotten some new answers, then I advocate the virtue of sacred, it's holy curiosity and sacred gossip, because then we have to tell people what we learned. You know, I thought so-and-so was really judgmental about something, but I didn't understand. I got talking with them, and here's what I learned, is that we can build those bridges. Maybe we can get the Marines involved in this and build a bridge across the divisions in our nation. But first, we've got to start with listening. It's critically important, and it starts with us. We can't expect them to listen to us first, because they'll never listen to us unless we listen to them. But when we listen to them, we learn something, and we can build something new, and it'll be better.
One of the great things I was taught when I was serving in office was that famous expression, and it's so true. They don't care how much you know unless they know how much you care. And,
Ooh.
and I think
Okay,
that
say that again. I think that's a keeper.
they don't care how much you know unless they know how much you care.
Amen.
Amen. And sister, thank you so much. And I